Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 660. Today we're going to take a look at Medium. This is a new game coming from Greater Than Games, and the byline is a mind-reading party game. So what this is, simply, is kind of a word game, but then mashed up with something akin to The Mind, which came out last year, but not really. It's just sort of barely gets into the vicinity of The Mind, but then it also has a lot in common with The Mind, which I'll talk about more in the review section. But let's go ahead and jump into how this game actually works. It plays 2 to 8 players, and it's going to play out differently based on the number of players. So let's jump in and see how it works, and I'll come back and tell you what I think. Okay, so here's everything that you get in the box of Medium. Now, the main piece of the game are these cards with words on them. You can see this one says melt, this one says muscle, and so on. Now, these cards are also numbered at the bottom here. You can see this says 1. And some of these other ones in here, you have dividers for, so they go 1 through, 15. So these are grouped in a certain way, and I have not figured out how they're grouped. They said that in the rules, they are grouped to sort of facilitate the best kind of telepathic psychic connections. I don't know if that's true, but I'll take their word for it. So when you set up to play a game though, you're going to take groups, any groups that you want. You're going to pick a whole group. You're going to do one less than the number of players. So if you're playing a 4-player game, you'll take 3 different groups and then shuffle them all together. So in this case, I just took the one group out because I'm just going to kind of demonstrate a 2-player game. And then you're going to set up little piles of points, and some of these are face up. They should all be face down, but you can see this one has a 1 there, and these have 5 and 6 points on it. This one has a 2 there, and then these have 3 and 4 points on it, and then so on. These have a 3, and these have 1 and 2 points. So you make 3 separate face down piles of those. And then here are some special ability cards, which I'll talk more about in the review. But I would recommend not really messing with these until you played it a couple times. They're not really advanced or anything. They just kind of add some funky dynamics to the game. And then what you're going to do is you're going to divide this stack of however many cards that you have, and you make basically 3 roughly equal piles. And then you'll shuffle in here the 3 crystal balls into one of the thirds, shuffle those together. That will be on the bottom, and then put the other 2 on top. And then you deal out 6 cards, word cards, to every player. And then you'll have a hand of 6 cards, and what you do is, let's say it's my turn, and this is going to play out basically a different number of players. You can play it in a few different styles, but just pretend we're playing a basic 2-player game. So I will take, and choose muscle. And I will play that down with my partner, because I'll be partnered with somebody at some point in the game. And then they'll have their hand of 6 cards. And then, I don't know, let's do table. So they'll play table. So that is the words that we're sharing. And then we're going to kind of meditate and think about these words, muscle and table, muscle and table. And without really communicating at all, try to figure out what they have in common. And you can take as long as you want to think about it. If you're playing with more players at the table, try not to be too long about it. But that's not really a problem necessarily anyway. So after a while, we're going to say, okay, are you ready? You're ready? Okay, we both thought of a word that will kind of link these 2 together. What do they have in common? That kind of thing. And then you're going to say, okay, countdown, 3, 2, 1, and then bam, you're simultaneously going to say a word. And I, for the life of me, cannot come up with a word with this. I would say weightlifting. If you were thinking that word, then me and you, through the power of time travel and YouTube and the internet and the camera, have linked up. And so if you comment and say, that's what I was thinking of, I will believe you. If we both matched up, that was our first guess. So we'll take a random face down tile here, and then we can look at it. And then we're going to put it in between us. Okay, so when you win the game, you win the game as a pair. So maybe on the next round, I'm playing, instead of the person to my left, I'm playing with the person to my right. Or maybe we're playing a team game, and we're playing with people across from each other. There's a few different ways that the rules give you to play. And obviously, if you're playing with a 2-player game, there's not really a way to have a winner, because you're just playing with each other just for fun. So you keep the points out of the game, and maybe you try to get to a high score or something. So that's what happens there. But let's say we didn't get that on our first guess. We both didn't guess weightlifting. So I guessed weightlifting, and you guessed rolling pin. Okay? And so now those become our new words. Instead of table and muscle, now it's weightlifting and rolling pin. And so we do the same thing. We think a little bit, go back and forth, and then we say 3, 2, 1, and then barbell. Okay? Does anybody else get barbell? I don't know. Maybe you did. And so if we got that, then we would grab a point tile here from the number 2 stack, because these are worth a little bit less. If we failed, maybe I said barbell and you said, I don't know what you said, but you said something different. And then you get one more chance, and if you get that, then you get one of the 1 and 2 point tokens here. And if you didn't get that one, then you get nothing. Now the one extra rule here is you can't use like pieces of the word, and you can't use previous words. So if we did, like we had muscle and table, and then we had weightlifting and rolling pin, we could then both say table on the next one to kind of link it back up. Any of the words that you have on the cards or that you said previous guesses are unusable. Now it's a little fast and loose with like what you can do. It's not like you have to be a single word or just one word. You could do a proper name. You can do a little bit of a phrase. You don't have to be exact. Like let's say we were coming up with something and it was like box and boxing. You said box, I said boxing. The rules say go ahead and allow that. Don't be a jerk, basically, is what the rules say. But we had one game where we were playing where I said stew and the other player said soup, and we even agreed as the players that guessed that shouldn't match, even though they're close. Stew and soup, they're kind of the same vicinity, but they're two different things, so we didn't allow that. So you got to have some wiggle room there in terms of what you allow as a correct answer. Now, like I said, there's some other different rules with, depending on the number of players that you have, if you're playing with strict teams and partners through the same partner throughout the course of the game, that kind of stuff. But this is the gist of the game here, is kind of sort of having that psychic connection about the words there. Now the game will end once we draw 3 of these broken crystal balls. So after you play your card and done your guesses, you're going to draw a new card back into your hand to get up to 6 cards. So as you kind of draw through this deck, you're going to slowly reveal the number of crystal balls. And based on how you're playing, you might play a couple extra rounds, but just so that everybody has an even number of turns and everybody got the same number of turns, and then you'll play the usually it's like 1 or 2 rounds maybe, or even seems to sort of coincidentally sort of coincide with that 3rd crystal ball. Then you total up your score, of course, and then the winner is player with the most points. Okay, so that is medium. Let's try to talk about my pillars of review with this game. It's quite a bit different and interesting of a game than any I've played probably so far this year at least. So player count, I've played this 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I've not played it with 7 or 8 players, although I would happily play it with 7 or 8 players. I don't know, I guess my preference would be 4. I think 4 is probably the perfect player count if I had to pick one, although I enjoyed it at all the other player counts. I enjoyed it at 2, I enjoyed it at 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, I didn't mention this in the walkthrough, but if you play with an even number of players, 4 and 6, and 2 obviously, you can kind of play simultaneously. So, like I said, the rules give you multiple modes of play. You can play with specific partners and stuff. The sort of standard way to do is you sort of oscillate left and right. You're playing with the player on your left, you're playing with the player on your right. And then hopefully one of your pairs is going to be the winner with the most points. So, if you have an even number of players, I play with Billy, Francesca plays with Frankie. And then we rotate, Billy and Francesca play, and then I'm playing with Frankie. And then you go back and forth. And you can just do it at the same time. And there's no issue doing that. And then you just have to kind of remember, what pair you started with, so that when the crystal balls come up, then you go, oh, we have to play one more round because I didn't get a chance to play with Frankie again. And that's the only thing, really. So you can play simultaneously, and that works really good. The rules kind of suggest you can sort of play around, and that's not terrible, because when you play with an odd number of players, you're always going to have somebody kind of sitting out if you're playing simultaneously. But it's not terrible to be waiting for your turn either. Having played at 3 and 5 players, I don't mind being sitting out, because I would get involved and invest in what match maybe Francesca and Billy are trying to match, and I would be like, I've got it. And they're like, leave us alone, we're trying to figure it out. But I'm like, I've got it. And then invariably, when they go 3, 2, 1, I'll shout a word out with them, right? And everybody was doing that. I'm not the only one that's doing that. So everybody's kind of doing that, trying to sort of piggyback onto their little partnership for the moment. And that's great, because maybe you'll match, all 3 of you match, or all 6 of you match if everybody's really invested in it. Or maybe you'll match with Francesca and Billy doesn't match, and you're like, me and Francesca had it. What's your problem, Billy? You know what I mean? So that adds a lot of fun elements to the game. Now there's even some special ability cards, which I kind of just hinted at, that you can do. So like when you're playing partners, if you can get a card that you can spend, and then you can sort of score points actually off of somebody else's partnership guess. So you can say, I'm going to play this, and then if you get it right, then you're going to match and you're going to get the points with them as well. So that's interesting. It keeps you kind of invested in everybody else's turn as well. And there's a couple other special abilities and things like that. But so that's the kind of the player count thing. And then I would say the play time is about half an hour, 45 minutes. I mean, obviously, the amount of cards you get, it sort of scales to the number of players. So you play about the same number of rounds, and whether if you're playing 3 or 6 players, it's going to take a little bit longer with more players, because some people might have a little bit of analysis paralysis, because sometimes you just get some words that are like, huh? Like, how are these even, what? I'm on a completely different page than you. So it's going to take a little bit longer, and that AP can be a little bit, I guess, irritating for some folks. I saw some complaints of people saying, well, I didn't really like having to wait for Billy and Francesca to go. I'm like, well, what's your problem? It was only like 2 minutes, and then the game's over in a half hour anyway. So there's a little bit of that, but I don't really mind that extra thing, but it does take a little bit longer, obviously, between 2 and 6 players. Now, what is this game like? Oh, I mean, it's like the Mind. That's the only thing I've heard people compare it to, but it really doesn't really play anything like the Mind. If you don't know what the Mind is, go Google a review of it. But it's I don't want to sit here and try to figure out how they are and aren't together. The thing that they 100%, in my opinion, do have in common is the emotional rush when you win a round. Okay, so here's the thing. So in the Mind, you play cards, and if everybody kind of syncs the cards up, it's great. Everybody high fives, especially later in the game. In this, it's very interesting because you put a card down, and then you do, oh, we got it, 3, 2, 1, and then you just get it because it's kind of obvious, right? Or you just know, because you kind of know each other well, that you get it, and it feels good. I mean, it's just a really nice feeling that you and this person share. It's nice. But it's also really cool to get down and, like, let's say you miss your first guess, and you get to the second guess, and then finally the third guess, and then they kind of pull that out of nowhere and then sync up on that. That can also, in some ways, you get less points, but in some ways it's actually more rewarding, like emotionally and stuff, to get it on that last guess. And I use an example here of what sort of hooked the game for me and made me think this is more than just like a silly word game, which it still kind of is, but that's okay. So we had 2 words. So me and my buddy Marty, well, I'll use his real name because he's also a podcaster. Me and my buddy Marty were playing, and I put out turtle and he put out boil, or it was reverse, I don't remember. Turtle, boil. So 3, 2, 1, I said stew, and he said soup, because you could boil a turtle, right? Turtle soup, turtle stew. So I said stew, he said soup, I think. And then from there, he was like, okay, we were like stew and soup, they're almost like too close. So he did 3, 2, 1, he said vegetable, which made sense because you put vegetable in a stew or soup. And then, although a good one there might have been for both of us to just say food, because the rules do hint that it's probably, if you're going for the point idea, you're trying to be a little bit more general. So if you can sort of default to more general word, then that's a little bit easier. But anyway, I digress. So he said vegetable, and then I was like, in my head, I'm like, stew and soup are so close. So instead of being general, being like food or something, then I was like, well, soups and stews, turtles. So I jumped sort of into left field, and I said Creole. So like, Louisiana Bayou food. And so he said vegetable and Creole. And because I decided I knew we wouldn't match on the second guess, I jumped out in kind of the left field, and he had vegetable. So now we had like a new sync, a new synchronization. So it's Creole and vegetable. And it took us a minute, and I had it in my head, but I'm like, I think there's another one. But then I'm like, you got it? We kind of went back and forth about a minute or so, and then we both said okra. So it was great. Like, I still get the chills from that, because we kind of like we weaved our way through this sort of maze and path of this mental space, our kind of common understanding of the world kind of thing. And then we arrived at okra. And that was really cool. Even though we got like 1 or 2 points for that, that was in some ways more rewarding than, you know, syncing up on soup or stew on the first guess. So because you can kind of play with that a little bit, that to me what's kind of made it a game is because you can sort of jump around. Like you don't just have to worry about, you know, being in sync and being in common. You can kind of throw and just play around in that sort of you know, that sphere, that mental sphere, if you will. I'm like bringing to mind like images of Professor X from the X-Men, of the astral plane, and he's kind of like manipulating little, you know, weird abstract things to sort of, you know, do his telepathy thing. So it feels like you're kind of in that realm. You're sort of like playing around and stuff. And because other players can sort of, you know, jump in and out of your guesses and just kind of come along, and just, you know, even casual observers could walk by and you're just like, oh, what do you guys, oh, okay, I got it. You guys ready? You know, you're not even playing the game. And so that's just fun. It's just a super fun game. The points are there. The points are not, you know, who cares? Who won the game? Bah. You know, I could see some people are like, well, the points are random and I didn't win. And it's like, well, you know, go play something else because that's not what this game's for. So there you go. I really, really enjoy this game. It's a great time. I like the little things they've added to it. I like how you've got the partner thing, the shared points, because you're also, you know, if you're playing with multiplayer, you're playing with different people, so you'll have, you know, kind of a different experience. I've seen where I'll be doing really well with one partner at the beginning of the game, and then the other partner we miss a couple, and then we kind of come back and we're in contention for winning the game because we've got some more cards and some, you know, more things. And you kind of like get to know each other and like how you're guessing. And so that's the other thing that's kind of similar to the mind. In the mind, it's all about timing and playing the cards. And so after you play the mind with people a few times, you kind of get their pace, their rhythm, you know, the speed. Whereas in this game, you get something similar to that. You get something sort of about, you know, oh, what kind of mental space they're in, you know, what kind of color, you know, they are, sort of. It's a weird, it doesn't make sense. I mean, that's just all mumbo jumbo, but you get this kind of strange, you know, sort of association, and you get to sort of know each other a little bit in that moment of where you're kind of at, where you're kind of thinking. So that's a kind of a cool, interesting thing. So I definitely think like everybody should have Medium. Last year, you know, Just One was kind of like the big word game every year. There's Code Names and Decrypto and some other ones like that. Just One, you know, obviously that one is Spiel des Jahres. That was a huge one. I still love that game. This is another one. It's like, okay, this really is doing something very different and unique, and you know, puts you in kind of a really fun mental state. So that is Medium. High recommend across the board, up and down, left and right, black and white, red and yellow. You got to get it. It's really fun. Lots of fun. Thanks.